taking a look at building the swatches specifically for our cities that we're going to be building, and then also learning how to make smart decisions in regards to workflow within our Illustrator files. So you'll need to have your handout, your Imaginary Cities handout. We're going to be working with color swatches, which you will be really comfortable with after doing your color wheel assignment. We'll talk about gradient swatches. We'll talk about how to build your file, good practices, all of that good stuff. We'll talk about how to do gradients, all of those kind of things. But this is something that you need to kind of have open kind of in the background, so that we can walk through kind of each step that we're going to be talking about. The first thing that I'm going to start off with is talking about our swatches. And so you've already done the color wheel, and you've already done tints and shades. So for each city that you are going to submit, you're going to have a set of swatches of every color that you're using. The first one's going to be the easiest because it's monochromatic. So what I've done here is you'll get a blank one. What I've already gone in and done is already filled in my tints, which we're going to do it the same exact way we did it with our color wheel. We're also going to do shades, which I did the same exact way that we did with our color wheel. The biggest change right here is going to be saturation, and so I'm going to walk you through how we're going to do saturation. Um, Saturation, if we take a look at each one of these, so I'm going to open this swatch. And so for each thing, and you need to remember kind of that these need to equal 100, we are going to be lessening the amount of the main hue, and we're going to be adding more black. So we're going to be neutralizing it and then also changing its value. So here you'll notice that my first swatch, I've got magenta at 90%, and then I have black at 10%. My next swatch is going to be magenta at 80% and my black at 20%. So the two are going to move consecutively closer and closer to each other. Open this one. So once again, and keep in mind your magenta and your black values should equal 100, and they're going to move closer to each other. They're going to pass each other, and then they're going to keep working in the other direction. So right here, I've got 70 and I've got 30 for that swatch. If I take a look at this one, I've got 60 and 40. And then right here is going to be my 50 and 50. So you'll see it's 50% magenta, 50% black. And then so on and so forth. And so we'll end up with kind of a very desaturated, low value swatch right here, kind of at the end. So this is what you're going to turn in with each one of your files. They'll look a little bit different. I'll talk about each one as we go through it, as we add more colors and more variations. Even though working with something that's monochromatic seems like it can be really limiting in terms of the swatches that you're using, you'll find that as you do your saturation, you'll realize that there's a lot of places to play with between your light values and your dark values. So this is the first thing that you need to do. And the other thing that you need to do is you need to organize your swatches. So you can probably take a look at my swatches and figure out what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a folder for this one. It says new color group. And this one is going to be my saturation. And I'll say, okay, I'll go ahead and close that. I'll probably be asking the class what these are called. We know that these are called tints. And so I'm going to go ahead and say a new color group for that. And we'll call these tints. And then our last color group is going to be our shades. And of course, as we start working with complementary and split complementary and triactic, these will infinitely expand as you make them. So right now I've got saturation, tint, shade, and then I have my original, and then I also have a black right there as well. So instead of like copying and pasting or remaking these into a new document, I'm going to show you a nice little trick. And most design programs, whether it's Adobe, Procreate, anything like that, will allow you to save your swatches. So I know that I typically like to use the same type of colors over and over and over again. So what I can do in Illustrator is I can click right up here. And I'm going to go down to Save Swatch Library as AI. You can also do ASE, which is going to be a broader way to save swatches. But right now we're going to start with the AI. Go ahead and just save it into that folder so you're not kind of hunting around for it. And I'll show you why that makes it a little bit easier when we go into our next file. I'm going to name this Demo so that I don't misplace it with one of my other city files that I'm working with. I'll say Save. And now I'm going to go into my new document. And so I'm looking here and I have tints and I have shades and I have grayscale and I have these other things, but they're not the right ones for what I'm going to be building in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to where we were before and I'm going to say open swatch library. You can also get to this from here as well. I can go right down here. I can click on this and say open swatch library. So there's two different ways that we can go through and look at it. This menu is going to be exactly the same on either way that you're looking at it. I'm going to go over, you don't need any of these, don't touch any of these. These are kind of pre-made ones that are a little bit generic. I'm going to go down to user defined and oh, look, there's my demo file and I'll say open that and oh my goodness, look at this. I have all my colors that I just made. I don't have to remake them. I can select them and then I can just say add to swatches. And what's great is look at that. I've got all of those colors. And so you can do this from the main color wheel file if you want to, if you feel like that would be helpful. But now I have all of these, I have all my swatches that I just made. So as you start to find colors that you really like and you really like to work with, this is a really good way to kind of go in and save them as you're working. So I've got my Illustrator file. I've already got it set up. One of the things I'm going to be doing is working with layers. And so layers is the best way that you can really work in any design program. Layers is one of those aspects of Illustrator, Photoshop, InDesign, Procreate that it's inherent that you learn how to work this way, mainly so that you work smarter and you work faster, and so that you can spend more time creating and less time kind of figuring out like, oh no, what shape is that layer on, or where is that, or I'm having a hard time finding things. So today we're going to work with layers. And if we go back to um, our our handout, what we're going to look at is we're going to build our layers. So we're going to create 4 new layers, and I'll show you how to make that. We're going to have a layer for our background elements, a layer for our city elements, large layer 3 will be our city element small, and then we'll also have atmospheric effects. And each layer is coded. It's completely, and you'll notice I already have some kind of already set up in here, and I'll click them on and kind of show you what we're doing. So to create a new layer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the bottom and say create new layer. And you'll notice it'll just kind of pop up right there. I am a person where I have to always name my layers to know what it is. So I'm going to call this my demo layer. And you'll notice that it's purple, and you'll see I have some other colors right there. And I can always double click on a layer and it picked, of course, one of my favorite colors, magenta, but you'll notice that they're all these colors. You can also do a custom color if you wanted to. And then you can also go ahead and pre-lock it, or you can do lots of different things. Right now, I'm just going to go ahead and say, okay, that looks good. So what my demo layer, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be kind of showing each one of these elements. So the first thing that you want to build is your background. And so if I go here, and I've got it turned off just so that we see what the blank slate looks like. We're going to be using our artboards a lot to kind of place things and work with things. Right now, I've got a rectangle that I've already put there with a gradient. So one of the things that you want to do is you want something to be on the background that's going to kind of anchor the entire piece that you're working with. One of the other things that we're going to be doing today is we're going to be designing gradient swatches as we're working, but you can't do that just quite yet until you've got all of your other swatches loaded in, because gradients work in a really specific way. So right now I'm going to turn this back off, and we'll go up here to my demo layer. My demo layer, we'll go ahead and say that this is my background. All right, and so we've got all of that stuff kind of turned off. So this is our demo background layer. And one of the first things that I know I want to do is I want to create a sense of kind of depth and space. So to make a background, I'm just going to draw out a rectangle. And your backgrounds can be as complex or as sophisticated as you want them to be. It's really kind of completely up to you in terms of like how you want to think about doing it. So when you're working with a gradient, and I'll go ahead and load this with, we'll do, let's see, what do I want? We'll go ahead and we'll load this with this color. So we're going to go to gradient, and we'll go to window, and about halfway down is going to be your gradient option. So the big thing to remember about the gradient tool is that you really have to have those colors already preloaded into it. So I'm actually going to pick, and I'll double click, and you'll see all my colors are kind of loaded. And your background can be really subtle. It can be really overt. It really depends on kind of what you want to do with it. So what I'm going to do right now is I am going to set my 2 points. You'll notice that there are different types of gradients. I strongly suggest that you do a right to left. The circular one can be a little bit cheesy. You're welcome to kind of go through and play with them, but do know that like some of them, um, they end up looking a little bit kind of Illustrator cheesy. Um, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go set my 2 points, and I can only do this if those swatches are already preloaded. So right now I'm going to double click on my slider, and I can pick any of my colors. Remember, the magentas are the ones that I loaded in from my preset from before. So let's say that I want a pretty desaturated background. I can go through and I can double click, and let's say I want to make it a little bit more dramatic. And if you need an extra step in there, feel free to make a new magenta swatch. That's totally fine. I'm going to say that looks pretty good. We can adjust the angle. So if you'd like it to be more something that's kind of top to bottom, you can change the angle right there. And then right here is going to be your slider for where that gradient is occurring. So it might be that you want to have the gradient only occurring in one area, or it might be that you want to kind of bring it down a little bit and make it a little bit more dramatic. I can also add additional points, which this will become more interesting when you are working with more, not just a monochromatic color palette when you have more options, but I can always click right there. I can double click once again. I can add, a pure magenta if I wanted to right there. Gradients are like the kind of thing that you could sit there and like really kind of like nitpick for a long time. Let's say that I drop that in and I'm like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. I can always go in and I can just hit delete and I can kind of get rid of that. Once I'm ready to use it, I can go in and I've got my gradient tool right here. And I'm gonna just kind of drop it in and kind of think about like, what do I want to do with this? What are kind of the elements that I wanna work with? So I'm gonna say new swatch. Oops, hold on. There we go. So I'm loading it into that shape. So right now when I'm looking at this, I want to change my angle. So I'm going to change that to 90 degrees so it goes up and bottom. The other thing is I can also kind of dynamically kind of shift what this looks like. So I actually like it where that darker, it's a little bit farther down. Maybe I want to make that a little bit darker. Maybe I want to add a second point in there. And I want that, yeah, there we go. That looks nice. Maybe bring that up just a tiny bit. So you can see that I'm going to spend some time doing this. I can also, as I'm working, I can also think about kind of, what works well as I'm going through and doing things. You can also expand it and kind of show it a little bit better if you want to. I'm going to click out of this, and now you'll notice that I've got um, my swatch loaded. So I'll say new swatch, I'll say new gradient swatch copy, and I'll say yes, please. And the great thing is I can always go back in, double click, and I can always go in and kind of edit it again if I need to. So I've got my background set up. So once again, the way the gradient tool works is we are going to go to our shape tool, and we'll go to our rectangle tool. I'll make a rectangle, and I am in trim mode right now, which is why you're seeing stuff kind of disappear off of the artboard. So we'll play with that. A solid background is really not going to allow you to manipulate the space in the same way that you want to, mainly because it's going to lack a sense of depth as you're working. So you do have to be thinking about these kind of things as you're going through. So what I simply did was I drew out my rectangle. So I'll step back. So I've got a solid color right here. I've brought the gradient up. I've designed what I want it to look like. And then as it's still selected, you'll notice it's still pink because I'm on my magenta layer. I'm just going to click on it and you'll notice that it'll fill it. And now, if I wanted to play with some different angles, I would be a little bit careful. We're going to talk about atmospheric perspective in a little bit. So right now we're going from kind of dark to light, the idea of kind of like light moving up something. And then I can go ahead and say save swatch or new swatch. If I made any changes, it would change it there. So I've got my background. My background is all ready to go. And this is a really good point to save and make sure that you guys are saving frequently as you're working. And so now I'm going to go back in and we'll step back a second. So now I'm going to show you, this is the background that I created before, which was with that kind of light blue. You'll notice I'm going to add a couple of things. So this is my background. And then the next thing that I'm going to be thinking about is like, what are my things that I'm going to be working with? So I'm actually going to come out of trim view. And as I turn things on, you'll see some different things kind of popping up and appearing off the side. So the first thing I'm going to start with are my large city elements. And I'm just going to work with shapes to make those. And I'll go ahead and show you how I did that in just a minute. Um, I'm going to work off to the side and kind of add different things or play with different things. I'm going to work with the Pathfinder. I'm going to work with some different ways to kind of organize my space. And once I have those main shapes I'm going to work with, I can use Option and click and drag. I can also hold down Shift, and then that way I'm not drawing the same thing kind of over and over again. Instead, I'm repeating them in some different ways. So these are my larger city elements. And of course, I can always preview it by going to Trim View. And like I said, I just kind of have my other elements just kind of hanging off at the side so that I know where they are and what they're doing. So those are my larger elements, including kind of this like cloud-like element. We'll talk about different effects and things like that in a little bit. And then also I have my city elements. And so if you've got something that's really small and kind of a pain in the butt where you kind of keep clicking on it by accident, you can also lock your layer. So you'll notice right there, there's a lock. And so you'll notice even though I kind of, whoops, I don't want to go in there. So you'll notice I'm hovering over it and I don't end up clicking it. And then our last thing that we're going to be working with, our last layer is going to be atmospheric elements. So kind of blending, working with what those things look like. So the 4 layers that you guys need to think about is your atmospheric elements, your city elements large and small, and then also your background. In our next video, we'll talk about how to make your shapes, how to work with some different blending modes. But right now it should be about organizing and thinking about how to organize your files so that they work quickly and efficiently.